The cameras flashed, capturing the perfect scandal. Arthur Vance, the millionaire philanthropist of the year, pulled his stunning mistress Castor Monet onto the stage. He kissed her a brutal public declaration of war against his own marriage. The crowd gasped a symphony of high society shock. He thought he had won. He thought his 8 months pregnant wife Clarice was at home, isolated and defeated. He didn't know that in 3 minutes Clarice would walk through those very doors, holding the arm of his greatest rival, Julian Thorne, and carrying a secret that would turn his entire empire to ash. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was not a room. It was a statement. It was a cathedral of capitalism, a testament to the fact that if you had enough money, you could make crystal weep light and command flowers from 3 continents to bloom in unison on a cold November night. Ice sculptures carved into impossible swans melted slowly, as if weeping for the sheer expense. This was the 47th annual Metropolitan Benefactors Gala, an event where attendees didn't just donate, they pledged. They pledged fortunes to have their names carved onto hospital wings and university libraries, a public insurance policy against their private sins. And tonight, Arthur Vance was the high priest. At 42, Arthur was a monument to his own success, carved from ruthless ambition and tailored in bespoke Tom Ford. His company, Vance Industries, had not just cornered the tech market, it had consumed it. His smile, a weapon he deployed with surgical precision, was currently aimed at Robert Chen, a man whose family wealth was so old it smelled of railroad ties and dust. Arthur marvelous turnout. Simply marvelous. Chen said his voice, a smooth, slick baritone. He gestured the room a sea of diamonds and desperation. "And where is the lovely Clarice? We were so hoping to see her. The pregnancy glow, you know. Nothing like it." Arthur leaned in a mask of concerned husbandry, slipping perfectly into place. It was a performance he had perfected. "Ah, Robert, thank you. You're too kind. She's resting at home. 8 months, you know. The doctor practically forbade her from coming. She's terribly upset to miss it. But I told her, 'My darling, your health, and the health of our son, comes first.'" It was a magnificent, compassionate lie. The last time he had seen his wife 3 days ago, she had been standing in the cavernous, sterile kitchen of their penthouse, her hands clutching a financial statement. "Arthur, what is this new offshore account? Why is it in the Caymans? It has millions in it." He had looked at her swollen belly, at her plain, practical clothes, and felt a wave of such profound revulsion he'd almost recoiled. "Are you my wife, Clarice, or my accountant?" He'd snapped. "It's for the baby's trust. Don't concern yourself with things you don't understand." When she'd persisted, her voice quiet but firm, he'd turned and left. He'd left her with nothing but the hum of the air filtration system and the echoing silence of their 10,000-square-foot glass box in the sky. Tonight was not about Clarice. Tonight was about his ascension. Clinging to his arm, a slash of crimson silk against the room's muted golds, was Castor Monet. Castor was not just a mistress. She was the mistress. At 25, she was a former art curator, with eyes that assessed value in art in jewelry, and in men with terrifying amoral speed. Arthur had publicly installed her as the new head of the Vance Foundation's art acquisition department. Society whispered, but Arthur didn't care. He wanted the whispers. He wanted the fear. He wanted them to know he was a man who took what he wanted. Consequences be damned. "You look tense, darling," Castor murmured, her crimson-painted nails tracing the lapel of his jacket. Her voice was a low, smoky purr. "It's your night. You're getting the big one. Smile." "It's our night," Arthur corrected, squeezing her hand, his thumb brushing the massive ruby he'd bought her last week. He looked past her, his gaze sweeping the room. He was scanning for one man. Julian Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Dynamics, was conspicuously gloriously absent. Good. Thorne was the only real threat to his dominance, a quiet shark who never showed his teeth until he was tearing you apart. Arthur had been trying to force a hostile takeover of a key subsidiary of Thorne's for months, and the battle was getting bloody. Thorne's absence was a concession, a white flag. It meant Thorne was in Singapore, as the financial papers had reported, scrambling to save his Asian markets. He had lost. "He's not here," Castor said, knowing exactly who he was looking for. "He's running. You won, Arthur. You always win." Arthur's smile finally became genuine. "Yes, I do." He was tired of the pretense. So incredibly tired of Clarice's quiet disappointment, her passive-aggressive questions about his schedule, her moral objections to his business tactics. He was tired of her pregnancy, which felt less like a joy and more like an anchor. He was a rocket, and she was dead weight. He had married her 6 years ago, the sad, bookish daughter of a failed tech dreamer. He had given her a name, a home, a life, and in return, she had given him ballast. Tonight, he would cut the rope. "Ladies and gentlemen," a voice boomed from the stage, "if you could please take your seats. The awards presentation will begin momentarily." Arthur guided Castor to their table. Table 1, front and center, directly in the blast radius of the stage lights. He felt the weight of hundreds of eyes on them. They saw the billion-dollar man. They saw the young, vibrant, beautiful woman at his side. They noted with delicious, hushed speculation the absence of the 8 months pregnant wife. This was exactly what he wanted. "You're sure she won't show up?" Castor whispered, a tiny flicker of insecurity in her voice. "She could, you know, just to make a scene." "I told you she's not coming," Arthur said, his voice a definitive snap. "She doesn't have the spine. She's home. Probably knitting or crying. It doesn't matter. After tonight, nothing that happened before matters. I'm going to give a speech, accept the award, and then, my darling, I'm going to introduce the world to my real partner. The pretense is over." He was about to be named Philanthropist of the Year. It was the ultimate irony, a shield of respectability he'd paid millions for. And he was going to use that shield to commit the most public, brutal execution of a marriage this city had ever seen. And now, the host on stage announced a blandly handsome man from a morning news show to present our highest honor, the Metropolitan Beacon of Philanthropy Award, for his transformative contributions to pediatric care. Please welcome the head of the Gala board, Mrs. Maria Alvarez. Arthur straightened his bow tie. He gave Castor's hand a final conspiratorial squeeze. Showtime. Maria Alvarez, a stern-looking woman in her late 60s, who controlled half of the city's commercial real estate, stepped up to the podium. Her family was older than Chen's, and she wore her power with the understated severity of a monarch. "Philanthropy," she began, her voice crisp and commanding, "is not just about writing a check. It is about vision. It is about a bold, unwavering commitment to the future. It is about legacy." Arthur listened, his heart thrumming with a predatory rhythm. He had this moment choreographed down to the second. He had timed it for maximum impact. The press was here. The live feed was running. His lawyers were ready to file for divorce at 9 a.m. tomorrow, citing irreconcilable differences. This public act would force Clarice's hand, make any messy fight on her part seem like the spiteful hysterics of a woman already abandoned. He would be seen as a man of passion, honesty, and courage. She would be seen as the frigid, sad wife he'd been forced to leave. A man who has redefined the skyline of our city and the future of our children's hospitals, Maria was saying. A man whose Prometheus initiative is set to change the world. This year's beacon of philanthropy, Mr. Arthur Vance. A wave of thunderous polite applause. Arthur stood. He kissed Castor on the cheek, a calculated ambiguous gesture, the before picture, and buttoned his jacket. He climbed the stairs, shaking Maria's hand, and accepted the heavy crystal award, an abstract flame. He stepped up to the podium. The light was blinding hot. He saw the sea of faces, a glittering tapestry of rivals, allies, and parasites. He saw the red recording lights of the media cameras in the back. Perfect. Thank you, Maria. Thank you to the board. He began, his voice resonating with a false humility he had spent decades perfecting. I am deeply humbled. We at Vance Industries believe that building a better future isn't just a goal, it's a responsibility. He spoke for 3 minutes about hospital wings and scholarship funds. He was charming. He was believable. He was a magnificent liar. But, he said, pausing, letting the room hang on the word. He adopted a more serious, intimate tone. I've learned recently that true philanthropy, true honesty, doesn't just mean being true to the world, it means being true to oneself. A few people shifted. This was off script. At table 1, Castor's eyes were glued to him, shining with anticipation. We are taught to live in boxes, Arthur continued, his voice swelling with manufactured emotion, to maintain appearances, to live a life that is convenient, to honor commitments that are no longer true. He looked directly into the main camera at the back, the one broadcasting this live to the Gala's website. He was speaking, he knew, directly to Clarice, if she was even bothering to watch. This was her official notice. But true passion cannot be contained in a box. True vision demands courage. And tonight I want to be truly courageous. I want to honor the real inspiration for my work. The person who has unlocked my own future. He set the crystal award down on the podium with a definitive thud. The person who has shown me what a real future looks like. The person who is my true partner in all things. He turned and held his hand out, not to his table, but directly to Castor. Castor, please join me. A collective, sharp, sucking intake of breath swept the ballroom. This wasn't a whisper anymore. This was a sonic boom. This was a declaration. What is he doing? Robert Chen hissed at his table, his eyes wide, a predatory smile just beginning to touch his lips. Maria Alvarez, still on stage, looked as if she'd been slapped. This was her gala. This was a circus. Castor Monet stood. She was the picture of feigned, breathless surprise, her hand fluttering to her chest. She glided up the steps, her crimson dress like a trail of blood on the pristine stage. Arthur, she whispered, playing her part to perfection, as if she were shocked by this development. This, he announced to the silent, horrified, and utterly thrilled room, is the future of the Vance Foundation. This is the woman who has shown me what genuine passion is. And I can no longer live a lie, Arthur declared. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her flush against him. He looked at the cameras, then at Castor. And he kissed her. It was not a chaste, polite kiss. It was a deep, possessive, branding kiss, a claiming. It was a 5-second demolition. The pop, pop, pop flash of cameras exploded in the room, a deafening, frantic strobe effect. It was a public execution of his marriage. It was the announcement of a new queen. He broke the kiss. Castor was breathless, her eyes shining with pure, unadulterated victory. Arthur Vance held his mistress in his arms on the most respected stage in the city, with his Philanthropist of the Year award glittering beside them. He had just detonated his life, and he felt invincible. He had won. He had everything. And then from the back of the ballroom, the grand oak doors opened with a soundless, heavy swing. The opening of the doors sucked the sound from the room. The frantic clicking of cameras stuttered and stopped. The whispers died. Even Arthur, high on his own audacity, froze, his arm still locked around Castor's waist. Two figures were silhouetted against the bright light of the lobby. They stood for a moment, a tableau letting the room's attention pivot entirely to them. Then they walked in. It was Clarice Vance. She was not in a bathrobe weeping in her penthouse. She was not in a shapeless maternity dress. She was in a bespoke, floor-length gown of the deepest emerald green, the silk shimmering like liquid malachite. It was tailored with breathtaking precision to accommodate her 8-month pregnancy, making it a feature of her power, not a sign of her vulnerability. Her honey-blonde hair, usually tied back in a simple practical bun, was swept up in an elegant chignon, revealing the sparkle of what looked like the legendary Hayes emeralds. The necklace and earrings were heirlooms of her disgraced family pieces Arthur hadn't seen in 6 years. He'd assumed she'd sold them. She looked radiant. She looked regal. She looked completely, terrifyingly serene. But it was the man she was with that caused the second, more profound wave of shock, the one that made Robert Chen drop his champagne flute. His hand was placed respectfully, protectively at the small of her back. He was tall, with a stillness that was more intimidating than Arthur's brash energy. He wore a simple, perfectly cut black tuxedo, and his eyes, a piercing grey, swept the room with the cool disinterest of a man who owned everything he saw. It was Julian Thorne. Julian Thorne, CEO of Thorne Dynamics, Arthur's mortal enemy. The one man in the city whose net worth rivaled his own. The man who was supposed to be in Singapore, defeated and irrelevant. Arthur's blood ran cold. This was wrong. This was impossible. This was not the plan. On stage, Castor's triumphant smile faltered her face, turning a pale, sickly white beneath her makeup. "Arthur," she whispered, her grip tightening on his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve. "What is she doing here? Who is that? That's Thorne. Why is she with Thorne?" Arthur couldn't answer. He was paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the image. It was a glitch in his reality. Clarice and Julian didn't look at the stage. They didn't look at Arthur at all. They advanced with a slow, deliberate confidence, parting the sea of shocked guests. The gala's coordinator, a panicked woman named Clara, rushed toward them, wringing her hands. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Thorne, we didn't have you on the list together. Your table. Mr. Vance's table is right here at the front." "We're not here for table 1. "Clara," Julian Thorne's voice, cut through the silence, calm, clear and carrying. "We have our own." He guided Clarice past Arthur's front and center table, past the shocked faces of Robert Chen and a now furious Maria Alvarez. He led her to a large, empty table, table 2, which had until this moment been assumed to be for a last-minute donation from the mayor's office. As they sat, Julian pulling out Clarice's chair, 2 waiters seemingly waiting for this exact cue instantly appeared with a bottle of Dom Perignon and a tall glass of sparkling water with a lime twist. They were expected. The silence stretched, unbearable. Every eye in the room ping-ponged between the stage where the millionaire stood with his mistress and the floor where the pregnant wife sat with his greatest rival. It was a social standoff of nuclear proportions. Arthur, his face, a thundercloud, finally found his voice. He stepped down from the stage, dragging a bewildered Castor with him. The spell was broken. The room erupted in a cacophony of hushed, frantic speculation. "This is a joke," Arthur snarled, his voice low and dangerous for Castor's ears only. "He's trying to humiliate me." He's parading my wife around to get back at me for the takeover. He's succeeding." Castor shot back, her panic turning to anger. "Your wife is here with Julian Thorne, Arthur. Do something. This is our night." Arthur stalked across the 20 feet of plush carpet separating the two tables. He felt like he was wading through cement. The media was back, cameras flashing, reporters scrambling from the back of the room, held back by overwhelmed security. This was no longer a scandal. It was a war. He slammed his hands down on their table. The silverware jumped. "Clarice!" he spat. Clarice, who had been calmly unfolding her napkin, looked up. Her blue eyes were not filled with tears. They were not filled with anger. They were clear, cold, and assessing, like a surgeon about to make the first cut. "Arthur," she replied, her voice even almost conversational. "You forgot your award." Julian Thorne sipped his champagne, his eyes fixed on Arthur over the rim of the glass. "Vance, a dramatic speech. You've always had a flair for the theatrical. And for redundancy." "What the hell is this, Clarice?" Arthur demanded, ignoring Julian. His voice was a low growl. "What are you doing with him? You were supposed to be home." "Yes, I know, that's where you left me," Clarice said, her voice carrying just enough for the surrounding tables to hear. "But as you said, Arthur, one must be true to oneself. I felt I simply couldn't miss your big night. You've made so many announcements. You're making a fool of yourself," he hissed, leaning in his face inches from hers, "and of me. Get up. Leave. Now." "I don't think so," Julian Thorne said, placing his glass down with a soft, definitive click. "Clarice is my guest tonight. And as it happens, my new business partner." Arthur recoiled as if struck. "Your what business partner?" Julian repeated, as if to a slow child. "It's a very simple concept. Two people, working together. You should try it sometime." "You're insane," Arthur spat, looking at Clarice. "You're signing papers you don't understand. He's using you." "Oh, I understand exactly what I've signed, Arthur," Clarice said. She smoothed the napkin on her lap. "For the first time in 6 years, I understand everything." She looked up, her gaze finally meeting his, and the smile she gave him was the coldest thing he had ever seen. It was a smile of finality. "My name," she said, "is Clarice Hayes, and I believe you have something of mine." The name Hayes landed in the room with the solid, dull thud of a coffin lid. Arthur Vance's world tilted. Hayes. Of course, he had forgotten. No, he hadn't just forgotten, he had actively, arrogantly dismissed it. When he married Clarice Hayes 6 years ago, she was just the quiet, bookish daughter of a disgraced, bankrupt tech pioneer, Dr. Aris Hayes. Her father had been a legend, a visionary in the 90s, until his company, Hayes Innovations, imploded. The story was that Aris Hayes was a dreamer, not a businessman, and he'd driven his company into the ground, dying in obscurity, his reputation ruined. Arthur, then a junior partner at a ruthless venture capital firm, had been part of the team that picked the company's bones clean. He'd met Clarice at the funeral. He'd seen her as a sad, beautiful, and most importantly, uncomplicated asset. He had absorbed her into his life, given her his name, and filed her family's legacy away under irrelevant. Now that legacy was sitting across from him, sipping water and looking at him like a bug. "Hayes!" Castor whispered, tugging on his sleeve, her voice shrill with confusion. "Who is Hayes? I thought her name was Vance." "Shut up," Arthur snapped. He turned back to Clarice, his mind racing, trying to calculate the angles. "What is this, Clarice?" A pathetic attempt at a countersuit. "You're angry. I get it. You'll get your alimony. Don't embarrass yourself." Alimony. Clarice raised an eyebrow, a flicker of genuine amusement in her eyes. Arthur, you seem to be confused. I'm not here to discuss the end of our marriage. You've already done that quite publicly. She gestured to the stage. Thank you for making that part so clear. It saves us both a great deal in legal fees. No, I'm here to discuss the end of your company. A laugh, harsh and dry, escaped Arthur's lips. My company. Don't be ridiculous. You're pregnant and hysterical. Thorne put you up to this, didn't he? A last-ditch effort to stop my takeover. It's pathetic. My Prometheus division alone is worth more than his entire... The Prometheus division. Clarice interrupted her voice, cutting through his tirade like a diamond. Yes, let's talk about that. She turned not to Arthur, but to the room at large, to the guests at the surrounding tables, who were now shamelessly standing and crowding closer. For 6 years, Clarice said, her voice now ringing with a clear, cold authority. My husband told me my father died a failure. He told me his work was meaningless. He let me believe his portfolio of patents was just sentimental junk I was clinging to. They were, Arthur sneered. I sold them off years ago to clear his debts. Debts I paid. No, Clarice said, shaking her head slowly. You didn't sell them. You transferred them. On our honeymoon, you had me sign a stack of papers. You said it was to consolidate our estate. I was 24. I was in love. I was a fool. What you were, she continued, was a thief. You transferred my father's entire intellectual property portfolio to a shell corporation you owned in Delaware for the sum of $1. And then you licensed those patents back to your own company, Vance Industries, for a fraction of a penny on the dollar, all while listing them as a depreciating asset. But they weren't depreciating, were they, Arthur? The blood drained from Arthur's face. The room was so quiet he could hear the hiss of the melting ice swans. You forgot to tell me, Clarice continued, that one of those worthless patents was for something called the Hayes Inertial Compensator, a self-correcting algorithm for navigational data based on quantum-level particle physics. Does that sound familiar? Arthur was speechless. It should, Clarice said. It's the entire backbone of your Prometheus division. It's the multi-billion-dollar invention that won you this award tonight. You didn't invent it, Arthur. You stole it. From me. From my father's legacy. Castor looked at Arthur, her eyes wide with the first dawning of genuine fear. Arthur, what is she talking about? Is this true? She's lying. Arthur roared loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. She's insane. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Am I? Clarice said calmly. She reached into her emerald green clutch and pulled out a single folded piece of paper. She didn't hand it to him. She handed it to Maria Alvarez, who had cautiously approached the table, her face a mask of thunder. Mrs. Alvarez, Clarice said, as a member of the board, I thought you should see this. It's an injunction, filed this afternoon at 4:50 p.m. with the Southern District Court of New York. It freezes all assets, personal, corporate, and foundational, related to the Prometheus project, pending an audit and a federal investigation into intellectual property fraud and wire fraud. Maria Alvarez unfolded the paper. Her eyes scanned the text. Her face went from gray to white. This is real. It's stamped. It's signed by Judge Michael Romano. His assets are frozen, Robert Chen whispered, loud enough to be a shout. But his speech, someone else stammered from another table. The new hospital wing. He pledged $50 million of money he didn't have. Julian Thorne supplied his voice, ringing with cold authority. He stood up, placing himself between Arthur and Clarice. That pledge was being funded by projected profits from technology he did not own. The philanthropy we celebrated tonight was in fact the most audacious act of embezzlement this city has ever seen. The room was no longer silent. It was chaos. Phones were out. People were shouting, streaming, tweeting. The market would be a bloodbath on Monday morning. Arthur Vance looked at the paper, at Maria, at Julian, and finally at his wife, the woman he had dismissed as weak, as sentimental, as knitting. "You," he whispered, his voice choked with a venomous, uncomprehending rage. "You did this. You were nothing. I gave you everything." "You gave me nothing," Clarice said. "You took everything. Now I'm taking it back." "You bitch." He lunged. It was a primal, mindless snarl of an animal. He didn't lunge at Julian, the man who was his equal. He lunged at his pregnant wife. He never made it. Julian Thorne's hand shot out, not in a punch, but in a solid, powerful shove. He caught Arthur square in the chest. He didn't just stop him, he propelled him. Arthur, a man who hadn't been physically challenged in 2 decades, stumbled backward, his arms windmilling. He crashed directly into the 6-foot-tall champagne tower. The sound of shattering glass, thousands of flutes, was like a bomb exploding. The hiss of $1,000 worth of champagne, the screams, the chaos, it was the sound of the end. Arthur Vance lay on the floor, drenched in Dom Perignon, and failure staring up at the crystal chandelier. Clarice Hayes stood up her hand on her pregnant belly. She looked down at her husband, her face a mask of cold, clean pity. "The lie," she said, "is over, Arthur. You wanted a new beginning. Congratulations." This was not a spontaneous act of revenge. It was a demolition. It had been planned for 6 months, with the precision of a military campaign. The first crack had appeared, not as a bang, but as a whisper. 4 years into their marriage, Clarice had given up trying to connect with Arthur. He was a creature of surfaces, and she was a creature of depth. Their life was a cold, beautiful prison. Then she got pregnant. She had hoped, with a naivete she now despised, that it would change him, soften him, bring them together. It did. It made him colder, more distant, more cruel, and more careless. 6 months ago he had come to her in her study, all smiles and false affection. He'd slid a document across her desk, a simple post-nuptial update, his lawyers called it. Just cleaning up the estate for the baby. Arthur had smiled, his hand on her shoulder. A formality. Clarice, desperate for any sign of partnership, had almost signed it. But a single clause buried on page 42 snagged her attention. All prior intellectual property and outstanding familial inheritances, dormant or active, shall be considered marital assets under the sole stewardship and discretionary control of the Vance-controlled trust. Sole stewardship. Discretionary control. "This looks like I'm signing away my family's name, Arthur," she'd said, trying to keep her voice light. Arthur's reaction had been explosive. The mask hadn't just slipped, it had shattered. Ungrateful, he'd called her. Stupid. Paranoid. "Do you have any idea what I've given you? Sign the damn paper, Clarice." He'd stormed out. That night, for the first time, he didn't come home. The next day she saw a gossip site photo of him dining with Castor Monet. That was the moment the wife died, and the heiress woke up. Clarice had gone to the one person her father had ever trusted, the one name he had mentioned in his final heartbroken days. His former protégé, a brilliant young engineer who had idolized her father's work, a man who had been pushed out of Hayes Innovations by the same venture capital firm that Arthur Vance worked for, Julian Thorne. She met him not in a boardroom, but in a public cafe in Brooklyn, far from the eyes of Manhattan. She was bundled in a simple coat, unrecognizable as the wife of Arthur Vance. "Clarice Hayes," Julian said, standing as she approached. He hadn't seen her since her father's funeral a decade ago. You look, well. I'm not, she said, sitting her hands trembling. Julian, I need help. I think my husband is trying to steal from me. She showed him the post-nup. Julian read it, his face growing darker with every page. This isn't a post-nup, Clarice. This is a theft. What familial inheritances does he mean? I don't know, she confessed. My family. We lost everything. All that's left are my father's papers, his old patents. Arthur always said they were worthless. Julian's eyes locked on hers. Worthless, Clarice. What patents? That night she let him into the climate-controlled storage unit in Queens where she kept her father's archives. It was a sterile, sad room filled with boxes. For hours, Julian Thorne, a titan of industry, sat on the dusty floor, poring over schematics, old code, and legal documents. At 3:00 a.m., he held up a single 80-page document bound in blue. My God, he whispered. What is it? Clarice asked, her heart pounding. This, Julian said, his voice shaking with a mix of reverence and cold fury, is the Hayes inertial compensator, your father's Project Icarus. The world thought it was a failure. Arthur, his firm, they were the ones who leaked to the press that it was a financial black hole. They're the ones who bankrupted him. He looked at her, his eyes blazing. Clarice, this isn't just a patent. This is the entire basis for Vance Industries' Prometheus division. It's his flagship product. He didn't just discover it. He buried your father, married you, and stole his life's work. It's all yours. The scale of the betrayal was staggering. Arthur hadn't just married her and set her aside. He had targeted her. He had married her for her father's dormant genius, planning all along to plunder it. His entire empire was built on her father's grave. He built his empire on my family. Clarice said the words, tasting like ash. Yes, Julian said, standing and helping her up. And now we're going to bury him with it. For the next 6 months, they worked in secret. Julian's forensic accounting team, operating under the cover of a hostile takeover defense, dug into Arthur's finances. They found the Delaware Shell Corporation. They found the $1 transfer. They found the fraudulent licensing agreements. They found the Cayman Islands account, the one she'd asked about, where Arthur was siphoning off the real profits. Clarice, meanwhile, transformed. She wasn't just a victim. She was the daughter of Aris Hayes. She began to read her father's work to understand it. She started sitting in on Julian's meetings, learning the language of the world that had been stolen from her. She found her steel. Her pregnancy was not a weakness. It was a deadline. Her child would not be born into a liar's house. They discovered Arthur was leveraging the fraudulent Prometheus profits to finance his hostile takeover of Julian's company. He was using Clarice's own legacy to try and destroy her only ally. It's a house of cards, Julian explained 2 weeks before the gala. He's over-leveraged. He thinks he's a king, but he's a jester balancing on a beach ball. One push, and it's all over. The gala, Clarice set her hand on her belly. The Philanthropist of the Year award. That's his coronation. Yes, Julian said. He's planning to announce his new Vance Foundation wing, and my sources say his new partner. Castor Monet, Clarice said. She had known about the affair for a year. It was the least of Arthur's betrayals. He's going to humiliate me. He's going to try, Julian corrected, but he's arrogant. He'll do it publicly, and when he does, he'll be standing on a trap door. You'll be the one holding the lever. The plan was set. The injunction would be filed at 4:50 p.m., just before the gala. The bank's fraud department, run by a man whose career Aris Hayes had once saved, would execute the asset freeze at 5:00 p.m. Arthur, obsessed with his big night, wouldn't check his accounts. He'll be on that stage a billionaire in name only, Julian said. He'll deliver his own eulogy. And then you'll walk in. He'll be angry, Clarice had said, her voice steady. He'll be a trapped animal, Julian replied. And you will be the hunter. Are you ready? Clarice thought of her father, of the 6 years she'd spent as a ghost in her own home, of the child she was bringing into this world. Yes, she said. Let him have his party. We'll bring the fireworks. Back in the ballroom, the scene was one of total pandemonium. Arthur Vance, drenched in champagne, and failure was being helped to his feet by 2 bewildered security guards. He was sputtering his face, a grotesque mask of purple rage. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? We do. One of the guards said, his voice flat. Mr. Vance, we need you to come with us. This is my event, Arthur screamed, swatting at them, trying to regain a shred of dignity while soaked to the bone. Not anymore, Maria Alvarez said. She had her phone to her ear, her face ashen. She was no longer a society doyenne. She was a CEO in crisis. I've just spoken to our legal counsel. The Gala board is rescinding the award effective immediately. The police are on their way. We've been made complicit in a massive fraud. The word police sobered Arthur instantly. He looked wildly around the room. His friends, his allies. Robert Chen was already on the phone, his back to Arthur, no doubt speaking to his broker. The text on his screen would read, "Short Vank, all of it." The other guests were filming their faces, a mixture of horror and giddy Schadenfreude-fueled excitement. This would be the story of the decade. And Castor. She had backed away from the table, her crimson dress now splattered with champagne and shards of glass. She looked at Arthur not with concern, but with cold reptilian calculation. She was re-evaluating. The man she'd attached herself to was no longer a king. He was a liability. Arthur, she started, her voice high and trembling. My foundation, the money, the acquisition fund you promised me. Is it? It's gone, Julian Thorne said, flatly, not even looking at her. The foundation's accounts were funded by the same fraudulent profits. They were frozen at 5:00 p.m. Castor's perfectly painted mask of beauty cracked. The future of the Vance Foundation was an empty, frozen account. Her ambition, her victory had evaporated in the space of 10 minutes. She looked at Arthur, who was staring at her, pleading. Castor, baby, we can fix this. She took a step back. You, she whispered, her voice filled with venom. You stupid, arrogant fool. You didn't just lie to her. You lied to me. Without a backward glance, she turned, gathered her ruined dress, and shoved her way through the crowd, pushing past a reporter. She was gone. Arthur saw it. He saw his mistress abandon him. He saw his rivals filming him. He saw the security guards closing in. And he saw Clarice standing tall and serene with Julian Thorne at her side. You, he seethed, all his rage, all his humiliation, focusing into one burning point. You did this to me. You were nothing, I made you. I took you out of that sad little life. You made me a prisoner. Clarice countered, her voice ice. My father's work made me an heiress. You just forgot who you were robbing. I'll destroy you. He vowed, a last desperate threat. I'll take the baby. I'll tell the world you're an unfit mother, that you're insane, that you're sleeping with him. He jabbed a wet, shaking finger at Julian. Julian stepped forward, and for the first time his voice was not calm. It was lethal. You will do nothing, Arthur. You will spend the next year in depositions. You will spend the year after that in court. The SEC, the IRS, the Southern District of New York. They are all going to be very interested in the last 10 years of your life. You're not going to have time to slander anyone. You're going to be too busy trying to stay out of federal prison. The fight drained out of Arthur. He was, for the first time in his adult life, utterly and completely finished. He had no moves left. He had kissed his mistress on stage, believing he was sacrificing his queen, only to find out he had been in checkmate for 6 months. The security guards took his arms firmly this time. "Mr. Vance, this way. Now." They began to walk him, not toward the grand entrance, but toward the service exit past the kitchens, the path of shame. As he passed his wife, Arthur Vance stopped one last time. His eyes were no longer fiery. They were hollow dead. It was just business, Clarice," he whispered a pathetic final plea. It was just business? Clarice looked at the man she had once loved, the man who had stolen her name and her legacy. "It was," she agreed, "and you were just a bad investment." They pulled him away. The flashbulbs followed him, illuminating his pathetic, drenched retreat until the kitchen door swung shut, cutting him off from the world he had once ruled. Silence for a moment returned to the ballroom. Then Julian Thorne, ever the pragmatist, turned to the stunned, silent room. "Well," he said, his voice calm again, "this has been eventful, but I believe we still have a charity to fund." He turned to Clarice. "Ms. Hayes, shall we—" He offered his arm. Clarice took it. Together they walked out of the ballroom, not through the service exit, but through the grand entrance, as hundreds of people stood and watched. Some, like Maria Alvarez, even began to applaud. It started as a trickle, then grew. It was an applause of respect, an applause for the woman who had come to her own execution and turned it into her coronation. The downfall of the House of Vance was not just swift, it was absolute. The Monday morning markets opened to a bloodbath. Vance Gallagate and Prometheus a Phantom were on the cover of every paper. Vance Industries' stock, built on the lie of the Hayes compensator, plummeted 98% in the first hour of trading before the SEC halted it, entirely wiping out $40 billion in shareholder value. Arthur, out on bail, was a ghost. He was trapped in the penthouse, but the penthouse was no longer his. It was the courts, quickly affirmed, owned by the Hayes Trust, which Clarice's father had established to protect his primary residence. Arthur was a guest with a very short lease. His credit cards were declined, his bank accounts were frozen, his lawyers, seeing no money left to pay them, quit in unison. He was assigned a public defender. The man who had been celebrated for giving away millions was now filling out forms for financial aid. Casta Monet disappeared from New York society. Rumors circulated that she was back in Europe, trying to convince a minor Italian duke that her notoriety was a form of celebrity. She was, for all intents and purposes, erased. But as the House of Vance crumbled, the House of Hayes was being rebuilt. Clarice Hayes, with Julian Thorne as her partner and advisor, did not let Vance Industries simply die. She let it go into receivership. Then, using a portion of her now unfrozen and vast inheritance, she and Julian formed a new joint venture, Thorne-Hayes Dynamics. They didn't just buy the assets of Vance Industries, they surgically reclaimed them. At the public auction, Clarice, now visibly 9 months pregnant, sat in the front row. She let the other firms bid on the worthless shell companies and the toxic real estate. She waited, and when her father's patents, the Prometheus portfolio, came up, she made one single overwhelming bid funded by the very Cayman Islands account Arthur had hidden. She bought back her father's legacy with her husband's stolen money. The first board meeting of Thorne-Hayes Dynamics was held a week later. Clarice, as chairwoman, fired the entire executive board that had been complicit in Arthur's fraud. She rehired the engineers, the real talent, who had been working on the Prometheus project, many of whom had known and respected Dr. Oris Hayes. "My father's work was never about profit," she told her new board, Julian, at her side. "It was about potential. Arthur Vance saw a tool for greed. We will see it as a tool for progress. We will rebrand, we will be transparent, and we will do what he never could. We will innovate honestly." 3 weeks later, Clarice gave birth to a healthy baby girl. She did not give her the name Vance. She named her Lily Hayes. Julian Thorne was named her godfather. The press photos were not of a beleaguered single mother, but of a triumphant CEO holding her heir with her business partner at her side. Clarice gave her first and only interview. She sat not in a sterile office, but in her father's old workshop, which she had bought and restored. What Mr. Vance did," she told the reporter, "was a betrayal of trust. Not just my trust, but the trust of his investors, his employees, and the public. He built an empire on a lie. Thorne Hayes Dynamics is built on a foundation of truth, my father's genius. I'm not here to be a businesswoman. I'm here to finish my father's work." The public, which had feasted on the scandal, was now captivated by the story of resurrection. Clarice Hayes was not the wronged wife. She was the avenging daughter. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the plaza was once again filled with the city's elite. But the name on the banner was different. It was the first annual Hayes Foundation Gala for ethical innovation. The atmosphere was not one of backstabbing and whispers. It was bright, optimistic. The ice sculptures were of rockets and DNA helices. At table 1 sat Julian Thorne. He was watching the stage, a rare, genuine smile on his face. He was the godfather to the 6-month-old baby girl Lily Hayes, who was currently fast asleep with her nanny in a suite upstairs. On the stage at the podium stood Clarice Hayes. She was not in emerald green. She was in a striking, sleeveless gown of optic white. She was the picture of modern power. Last year she began her voice, clear and strong. Many of us were in this room when we were given a painful public lesson. We learned that philanthropy without integrity is just public relations. We learned that success without honesty is just a debt you haven't paid yet. The room was silent, hanging on her every word. My father, Dr. Oris Hayes, believed that technology should be a force for good. He dreamed of a world where innovation solved problems, not created them. For a long time, that dream was buried. Tonight we unearth it. She spoke of the Foundation's new projects funding for young female engineers, new navigational systems for disaster relief AI ethics programs. Tonight, she concluded, we are not just raising money, we are raising the bar. I am proud to present the first ever Aris Hayes Award for Integrity in Technology to... As she presented the award to a tearful young student from MIT, a single reporter from the Wall Street Journal checking his phone gasped. He had just received a news alert. Arthur Vance, former CEO, sentenced to 18 years in federal prison for wire fraud, securities fraud, and embezzlement. Judge Romano denied appeal, citing an extraordinary and sociopathic level of deceit. The reporter looked up at Clarice Hayes, who was shaking the hand of the student. She was beaming. She was free. After the applause died down, Julian joined her on stage. "You did it, Clarice," he said, handing her a glass of water. "You rebuilt his name." "We did," she corrected, taking the glass. She looked out at the room, at the empire she had built from the ashes of her husband's betrayal. She was not a Vance, a wife defined by a man. She was a Hayes, a woman defined by her own strength, her father's legacy, and the future she held in her hands. The light from the chandeliers caught the emerald on her finger, not a wedding ring, but her family's signet. She was no longer in a gilded cage. She had become the master of the house. The fall was absolute. The victory was total. Clarice proved that the quietest person in the room is often the most dangerous. What Arthur meant as a public execution, she turned into her resurrection. He thought he was kissing his future queen, but he was really just kissing his entire empire goodbye. Justice in this story wasn't just served, it was a 5-course meal. What did you think of Clarice's revenge? Was it perfectly calculated, or did Arthur deserve even more? We read all your comments, so let us know your thoughts below. If you love stories of epic karma and fortunes reversed, make sure to like this video. It tells us you want more just like this. And don't forget to share it with someone who needs to see that justice will eventually always find a way. Most importantly, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas every single week. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a moment of the takedowns and twists we have in store for you. Thank you for watching,